Chinese President Xi Jinping's recent visit to Saudi Arabia was a closely watched one globally, for reasons more than one. It was only his third international trip since the COVID pandemic, his first touchdown in the kingdom since 2016, and most importantly, coming at a time when geopolitical tensions are high and differences between Washington and Riyadh are more visible than ever. The bonhomie among leaders of both countries, the series of agreements which include newer areas of cooperation, followed by a wider summit with a host of other Arab leaders. The outcome has been described by Beijing as a new era in China-Arab partnership. So is it Xi Jinping's biggest diplomatic initiative in the Arab world? What implications does it have for the region and the world? That's the global debate. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teena Jha. To discuss further the implications of what it means for the region and the world, I'm pleased to welcome distinguished panelists from across the world. Ms. Zoe Liu, Fellow for International Political Economy, Council on Foreign Relations, New York. Mr. J.B. Monier, Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, Asia Center. He joins us from France. And Ambassador Deepti Srivastava, retired. He's currently a Distinguished Fellow at Vivekanand International Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program. Ms. Liu, allow me to begin the program today with you. How do you look at Chinese President Xi Jinping's Arab outreach? What for you have been the biggest takeaways?
Yeah, thank you, Teena, for having me. It's a great pleasure to get a chance to talk to you. This is a great question to start with, right? What are the key takeaways? And I would say, I would emphasize that this trip, exactly as you said, is not Xi Jinping's first time to Saudi Arabia. When he was vice president, he visited Saudi Arabia, and then in 2016, he visited in the capacity of as China's president. And at this time, he visited Saudi Arabia not just for China-Saudi summit, but also for China-Arab and China-GCC summit. So when you think about the triple summits putting all together, Xi Jinping is meeting with important Arab world leaders. And that signals two important relationship priorities. On the one hand, there is political engagement, and in particular from the high-level diplomatic engagement. And then secondly, the deals revealed during these three summits signals that China and Saudi Arabia, and broadly speaking, GCC economies, are entering into a new type of strategic relationship centered on energy and goes beyond energy, including renewables and financial and infrastructure and so on and so forth.
Ambassador Srivastava, the fact that, the effort by the Chinese president has been in making his Arab vision much more clearer, but what implications does it have for the region? How does India view China's Arab outreach?
You have to see the recent visit of President Xi Jinping against the background of the visit of President Biden a few months earlier in July. And President Biden said that US is not going anywhere. It has a presence in the Middle East, and particularly in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia. Now, the scale of Xi Jinping's visit and the range of topics covered are directly calculated to challenge that statement. He had, as Joe mentioned, 3 summits. But at the same time, we need not overestimate the impact. You also have to see the reaction from the other side of the Gulf, from Iran, which was quick in coming. And this is a result of perhaps a Chinese overreach. The joint statement issued with Saudi Arabia as well as with the GCC countries had a reference to Iran's nuclear deal. And I think what seems to have irked Tehran is that the sentence reads that it must be ensured that Iran's program remains peaceful. And so assuming that mantle or mandate for this task, not only for China, but also devolving this on the Arab countries, which I'm sure is not taken very kindly by the Iranians.
Of
And
course,
there's a reference also to the impact on regional stability. And the third element was a reference to three islands in the Gulf, Greater Thum, Little Thum, and Musa, which are a matter of dispute between Iran and UAE. So the process of growing its footprints does not come without the baggage and the complications.
right. And
From Indian point of view,
considering that it was quite unusual, Ambassador, how is now China going to balance it, or whether it is going to, put forth its interest with the Arab worlds over and above what its interests are with Iran is something that we'll come back to you in just a moment. But let me bring in Mr. Monier as well into the discussion and understand his point of view. Mr. Monier, how is Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia and his wider meeting with the other host of Arab leaders is being perceived in your part of the world?
Hey, Teena, thank you very much for having me today here. So the visit is obviously a rightful move for China to attempt to play its role as a superpower. They have they're rightfully doing what they're supposed to do. Knowing that it's been a long and difficult march for China to connect with Saudi Arabia. It's only in the early 1990s that the Saudi Arabia recognized the Public Republic of China. Before that, they were, of course, supporting Taiwan. So China started working with energy, with deals with other Gulf countries prior to working with Saudi. So the Saudi relationship is fairly new from that point of view. And so it was important for him to tie up these knots, not just with Saudi, but of course I think the priority was not so much energy, by the way, but it's really regional geostrategies, and it's the relationships beyond oil, and it has to do with obviously weapons that China now sells to Saudi Arabia and to technology markets as well. I would put that first.
You're right, and perhaps that would worry the United States, Ms. Liu, isn't it? So how has the White House responded to, the cooperation going beyond energy, the fact that it touches upon newer areas of not just technology and innovation, but also defense and strategic partnership? So, of course, we understand that the current relationship that leadership of both sides enjoy has not been as cordial as it was in the past. But I just came across an interesting a comparison that was made that long ago, decades ago, one of the Saudi ministers actually mentioned that the relationship between US and Saudi is not a Catholic marriage, which allows only one woman. It is, in fact, a union, as per the Islamic law, which allows for 4 marriages. Do you think, of course, that didn't happen, but looking at the squabble that's happening now, perhaps the Saudi minister's statement is going to be true?
That's a great quote you just gave there. And I think it actually reflected the extreme pragmatism on both the Saudi part as well as the Chinese part, right? And as GB or Mr. Monier earlier mentioned, China indeed has emerged to be aspiring, let me put it that way, aspiring arms suppliers to the Middle East, in particular since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But China is not at the advanced level, right? The position of China as an arms supplier of choice to the Middle Eastern countries is literally is secondary. The attraction for the Chinese weapon system is the combination of a price point and industrial capacity, right? So from that perspective, yes, indeed, arms sales probably are going to become increasingly important. But at the current stage, when Washington views the relationship between China and the region, there are 2 important things to watch. The first one is regional stability and to what extent China might increase its security role in the region. And then secondly, it's really about the importance of energy and things beyond the energy, more beyond hydrocarbon, that revolves how China might play a longer-term role in the economic diversification as the globe is moving beyond oil and gas, and the Middle Eastern countries are very much nervous about that. And coupled with energy trade, actually, there is also the role of the US dollar, because the US dollar is fundamental, very important to US coercive financial statecraft and sanctions and all that. And if you think about when is the crowning moment for the US dollar to become the global dominant currency, that can go back to 1973 when Saudi Arabia said, hey, you know what? I think we are convinced that we are going to use the US dollar to price our oil. And the next year, the entire OPEC countries decided that they are going to go with Saudi Arabia. That sealed the US dollar's role. And now when Xi Jinping went to Saudi Arabia, he talked about the use of renminbi in the pricing of oil and the natural gas, not just for Saudi Arabia, but at the GCC summit. So from that perspective, I think Washington ought to be concerned about it.
Not just Washington, Ambassador. How concerning is is the latest development for India, particularly because enhanced interests means also greater engagements within the BRI. Also, the fact that all this while it was just posturing. Now it's a clear message from Saudi Arabia to the United States. Perhaps China using it as an opportunity to displace the United States as being the security guarantor for Saudi Arabia. So larger security implications for the Indo-Pacific region as well?
Let me begin by saying that we need not overestimate Chinese influence in this part of the world. The US remains and will remain in foreseeable future the primary security provider. China does not have the military or naval muscle. Mm-hmm. China also has to work out its equations, as I pointed out earlier. This is a very interesting paradox. That is, you increase your relations or raise the profile of your relations with the Gulf countries, and it has a reaction on the other side, which we have just seen, and vice versa. Now, some time back, I think 3 years back, China had signed a strategic partnership agreement with Iran, promising a 25-year relationship and $400 billion of, they never specified whether it was investment or trade. And in fact, the trade shrank from $21 billion to $19 billion next year, which is a huge, come down from the figure being trotted about of $400 billion over 25 years. So we have to take it with a pinch of salt. India does not have anything to worry about. And India, like China, is a major customer of Saudi and Gulf countries' oil. China, of course, is far ahead of India. I think their imports are about double the size of Indian imports. But we have much closer historical and ties with that region, and we have the advantage of being located closer.
Some of the analysts have even pointed out that it perhaps time for the Quad to walk the talk, turn into reality some of the visions that they keep talking about, and rightly so. If we want to address China's hegemonic designs, the fact that Xi Jinping today is the most powerful leader, and in the times to come, if he continues with the position despite the local protests, despite the supreme power that he continues to hold, how threatening could it be?
Quad was never supposed to take care of the Gulf security. It was given the two commands, Asia Pacific Command and the CENTCOM Command. They were two different commands. So I don't think we can mix up the strategic objectives of Quad and the objective of maintaining Gulf stability, in which India as well as US and the Western world have an interest.
Okay. Mr. Monia, how would you look at it? The fact that, is Saudi Arabia or, in fact, the other Arab countries just diversifying their interests and looking for other opportunities, with larger economies in Asia? Or is it true that being a smaller power in the alliance, Saudi Arabia is perhaps trying to give out a message to the United States that it is no longer going to go with its diktats? How do you look at it?
Well, we spoke about the visit of President Biden, and that was a mixed bag. There was a number of issues. I think there was some attempt at creating a new NATO in the Middle East and between Israel and the Arab nations, and some flyovers. There was energy, there was technology. So I think that we spoke about this geostrategy and the position. We see those, and we spoke about the wives and the several wives. We see that as the planets gravitating around each other and natural attraction, and so things are forming up. What China is clearly doing is trying to attack or trying to create a global South infrastructure of countries. There's been obviously selling debt at African and Southeast Asia countries, and driving some votes in the United Nations, we believe, by doing so. So there is, they continue to try to operate and gain markets. So that's part of their attempt. This meeting was a China plus many. That's the structure of their meetings. That's how they manage their relationships now, gathering a number of countries together with them. And both countries, back to your question about diversifications, China and Saudi have diversified their supply chain and their energy security. And so I think there is a kind of an arm's length distance between the two. They're not so dependent on each other, I should say. So energy is not the critical issue now.
Ms. Liu, is it just about, the temporary phase of squabble that we're seeing between Saudi Arabia and the United States, which you think may, turn better with time? But the fact also that with China now strengthening its position in terms of articulating its vision, how it wants to expand its cooperation, take it much forward to the current energy cooperation that, they share with these countries. How should the United States counter it with a much more positive vision, which is in the interest of these countries, wherein it already has a large credibility and trust factor? So it need not work on those aspects. The fact that this temporary squabble has created fissures, and this needs to be worked out with a better and positive version than China's, clearly.
That's a great question, Teena, again. So I would say that from Washington's point of view, indeed, China's increasing presence in the region is a concern, but also Washington has this tend to overestimate China's capacity, exactly as Ambassador Incharge mentioned earlier. But then on the other hand, I think from regional perspective, I remember talking to a couple of researchers based in Saudi Arabia, and I quote one of the persons that I talked with. So he told me that, right now the sentiment towards the Saudis' sentiment towards Washington is like this. President Donald Trump is not good or terrible, but the current administration is even worse than that, because they exacerbated the mistrust between the two countries. So that's the regional perspective. However, if you try to look at what the Biden administration trying to do, I think the Biden administration actually have done a relatively good, decent job trying to put up an alternative to China. But the fundamental challenge here is that a lot of these American initiatives, they do not necessarily have the large financial power behind it. Like, for example, America tried to put up together an alternative to China's BRI and try to equip the Development Finance Corporation and all that. However, all these initiatives, they need the participation of private sector, and there so far has not been a lot of promising progress making forward. Therefore, I think, yes, indeed, the Biden administration have been doing a lot of positive initiatives trying to counter China's influence, but the reality is China's presence is very, very large. China simply have a lot of state-owned capital and state-owned corporations that can engage in all sorts of initiatives. That's the limitation.
Of course, and there are other challenges as well, something that Ambassador pointed out earlier. Ambassador, coming back to the aspect that you mentioned, that the fact that China came up with an unusual statement, peaceful resolution for, the 3 islands that it never spoke about earlier, has clearly dented its relationship with Iran, and Iran clearly has also expressed displeasure with China. How do you look at now China balancing between Iran, with whom it has already greater relations, it enjoys strategic partnership with Iran as well, and now with the other Gulf countries, the kind of outreach that we have seen, how is China going to do that? Or do you think China is going to perhaps look at where its interests are more and then, chart out its future strategy?
To go back to the expression or the metaphor that you used about the Saudi perception that US is not the only wife in town. Now, when the Chinese decide to take too many wives, they also have to, there's a problem there. And they are, tackling that problem. They had to send a vice minister to Tehran to explain their position after the recent statement. And it will be very interesting to see whether the recent statement, which clearly, went too far, perhaps, from Iranian perspective in supporting the Gulf case, and not only that, in taking a dig at the implications of Iranian nuclear program for regional stability.
Right.
Whether this is just a temporary phase or this represents a turn in the Chinese policy, I doubt very much. I think the Chinese are too pragmatic, and they will walk back, or maybe they have already started the process of walking back. What needs to be done is, of course, it has to be decided by the countries of the region themselves, and this episode should also tell the Gulf countries how reliable the Chinese umbrella is, because if they are dissatisfied with the US position, which did not come forcefully enough, and more than that, in the Arab perception, they committed the cardinal sin of flirting with the Iranians. The Chinese position is exactly the same. They conducted a naval exercise with Iran. I think this was second or third or fourth such exercise. And they have conducted exercise with Saudi Arabia. They have supplied missiles, rockets, technology to Saudi Arabia as far back as 1990. So China is not an answer to the Gulf security problem. And Gulf is not looking for Chinese money. They are flush with funds.
Yes.
Reference to BRI was simply icing on the cake. Gulf countries and Saudi Arabia do not need Chinese money for their infrastructure. The quality of infrastructure in the Gulf countries, I'm sure you've been there, and Saudi Arabia, I was there a long time back, is far superior than anything which Chinese have built under BRI. Or so the issue
Clearly,
is not
no issue of a debt trap, something that we have seen in neighboring Sri Lanka.
No, it's the security issue, and China is no answer to the Gulf security.
All right, that having been said, Mr. Moni, I'll take one last question from you. So Ambassador says that, China cannot bring about the security and stability that is required in the Gulf region. The Gulf countries aren't looking towards China for its money. So how do you look at the future of this relationship then?
Well, I think the ambassador said it clearly. There is not much that Saudis and Middle East need from China. I think China has another problem, which is image now. Xi Jinping has really going to be facing a tough third term, whether he likes it or not. But he's facing, a complicated situation at home. He's facing a difficult image around the world, and in particular in Europe. Back to your earlier question, with Ukraine as a security issue for Europe, he's not really taking a clear position, and he's staying neutral at best. Neutral pro-China. And so that is a problem for his future relationship with Europe. So I can't see, but that's a challenge. He's not really taking the dimension of the superpower leadership that he should have. But I don't think he's able to do that yet, given his position around the world.
Absolutely. So different perspectives on what China's interests are and how it is going to build upon this relationship with the Gulf countries and vice versa is something that only time will tell. But time is running out. With that, we'll have to wind up the program. Thank you very much once again to all our panelists for joining us on the Global Debate and sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. Absolute pleasure to have you three on this edition of the Global Debate. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time. I'll see you same time next week. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.